I believe that the Trump story, like the comeback, right, from being indicted and being taken in for a mugshot, and then becoming a McDonald's worker, and then becoming a garbage man, and then becoming the president. Like, if you just look at this story, right, uh, it reminds me a lot of Steve Jobs. I'm not sure if maybe you could lastly comment on my Steve Jobs comparison, but the reason why I compared to Steve Jobs' story was because Steve Jobs got kicked out of Apple for being an asshole, basically, right? So he's super abrasive, just rude to everybody, right? And people found him so intolerable that they just had to get rid of him. Not only did they not want to make him the CEO, he's like, you have to get rid of this guy because he's like so insulting and so abrasive. And he's ruining the team spirit, ruining the company culture. They just said all types of nasty stuff about him, and he said a lot of nasty stuff about everybody else as well, right? So they kicked him out, and then Steve Jobs kind of bummed around for a bit, started his own company. It wasn't as successful as before, as Apple, obviously. And then it was mildly successful from what I read about Steve Jobs' history, but it wasn't like super world changing. And then the issue was that, but without Steve Jobs, like Apple itself went downhill. So it was like, although Steve Jobs' new company wasn't that successful, it was Apple who like fell from grace without Steve Jobs. And then it got so bad that people were practically begging for Steve Jobs to come back. And then they they didn't want to at first, but then it became apparent that the company was literally going to go bankrupt in like a few months, unless it was a change of direction and new leadership was brought in, right? So they brought in Steve Jobs, and then immediately he did all these big changes that scared a lot of people. And then what happened after that is that Apple is now the world's second biggest company by market cap, just neck and neck with Nvidia. And it was the most valuable company for a really long time until Nvidia, I think, recently overtook it. But yeah, they're still neck and neck. So again, this is a story of Steve Jobs, and the second time around, Steve Jobs was a lot better. And achieved his greatest success the second time around, because I believe during his time away, he learned a lot of lessons, went through his experience, assembled a better team, assembled more, wiser, smarter people around him. And then he came back and made Apple greater than it ever was, and brought it to new heights, right? So I really think that there's a very great parallel here between between the story of Donald Trump and the story of Steve Jobs. So I'm not sure what you think of this comparison. Do you think it's accurate, or what's your thoughts and opinions on this, Tristan?
I think we'll have to see. It really comes down to, what's going to happen in the end, because we don't know what Trump's going to do. He's very much a wild card. So could it be better? Maybe. Could it be worse? Also maybe, especially since he's got more power this time than he did last time, because now he's got the Senate and the House. So it's going to be it's going to be a bit of a ride. We're gonna have to see what happens. We're gonna have to see what he does, and hopefully this is more of like a second coming with more experience and a better understanding of what is expected, rather than kind of the more bumbling, not really knowing what he was doing route that he kind of went through at the beginning.
Yeah, my analogy is just, let's say, I don't know if any of our audience members are video game players, but I know, Tristan, you're a video game player, right? So when you play a video game, the second time you play the same game, are you going to do better or worse than the first time you played it? Like 99% of the time, you're probably going to do better the second time around, assuming that you actually paid attention and try to properly play it the first time, right? But assuming that you actually properly played through like everything, the second time around, you know what to expect. So it's kind of like you have almost like an unfair advantage because you can see the future, right? So like let's pretend you're playing, I don't know, like The Last of Us or something, right? And you remember it's like a story-driven game, and then you know that like a zombie is gonna jump out at this particular corner. So maybe you don't go around the building in this particular direction because you know there's more enemies this way. So then like there's stuff that you can do, and it's almost like it's an unfair advantage where you can see the future when you're playing a video game the second time. Now, of course, in real life, every situation is different, and you don't get to go through the exact map at the exact same situation. But I think it's for something like being the president. There's some things that you like have to maybe learn as a politician that Trump didn't in his life earlier because he wasn't a career politician. And I think that he admitted even on Joe Rogan that he didn't like expect to win, basically. Like he didn't say those exact words, but he implied that he didn't expect to win, and he had no idea what he was doing the first time around. So the second time around, I think it's almost like the second time playing a video game is going to be a lot better, and that's my opinion. So what are you saying?
We'll see. I mean, it really depends on what you qualify as better, right? Because maybe he is a lot better at making things worse, like what constitutes better. It's really an assessment of whether or not you think like he might be a more effective leader, but if he's a more effective leader for not good things, then he is not good for you or I in general, right? Like if he decides that the stock market needs to be crushed for some reason, like neither of us are going to be happy about that result. Not that I'm saying he will do that, but like it's I understand your analysis, but I think that there is a key overarching theme of you expect him to do good. I think in general, you expect him to do good, which means that him doing better in the second term means more good happens. Whereas I'm not really convinced that he's going to do just good, or heck, I'm not even 100% convinced he'll do any good in the first place, right? So if he is really good at doing bad things, we're going to have a completely different problem on our hands, right? So it's really going to be dependent on what he actually does and how he applies what he's learned, and hopefully he is going to be a more reasonable individual and have decided to go a better route in general. But we'll have to see what he actually does now that he's been elected. I'm hopeful that he'll do good things, but at the same time, I'm not counting my chickens before they're hatched. If I was American, I wouldn't be leaving the country, but I might find out what I could do elsewhere if I wanted to. And that's not to say that I'm advocating for the people who are like, I gotta run away now that Trump's elected. I gotta leave the country. But speaking as someone who doesn't live in America, if Trump makes a bunch of bad decisions, yeah, could they affect me? Yes. Will they affect me? Not necessarily, right? Like if he bans abortion in America, okay, I'm not in America. That doesn't change our abortion rights in Canada. So, and that's not to say that I am not I'm not compassionate to the plight of the people who are in America, right? That's not to say that I'm not empathizing with them. It's just that for me, whether or not he does good or bad is going to be much less of a impact on my personal life than it is to other people. So,
well, I mean, you have investments and you have money, a lot of money on the line, right?
Well, yeah, I mean the stocks and stuff, but like, I don't know if he's going to be doing stuff that necessarily are going to impact my investments significantly negatively compared to stuff that other parties could have done that would have impacted my investments negatively. So it's like, I mean, and also from my perspective, a lot of my investments will be like a lot of stuff that I am playing around with stock wise will be not necessarily going to be very far into his term. And then I have an opportunity to kind of reassess what kind of route Trump is causing, you know? Whereas like, you know, I think that's maybe not a luxury everyone has, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I agree with you that you know, I it's not gonna be like Trump is not gonna fix everything, and that's not what I'm trying to imply, right? Like I know for audience members who've been watching this show for the past few episodes, it seems like I'm trying to imply that Trump is gonna fix everything. He's the second coming of Jesus Christ and all that. That's not what I'm trying to say. Okay, so Trump is not the second coming of Jesus Christ, but he might be the second coming of Steve Jobs. And just that alone, if that's the case, then like he doesn't have to be the second coming of Jesus Christ. Like he just has to be it a lot better than what's going on right now. And I think that like the Democrats, quite frankly, and it's proven by this election that just happened, have done such a bad job at running the country that they've pissed a lot of people off, and the vast majority of Americans think that the country is going in the wrong direction. So my expectation is just this, right? So the worst that he can do is the same as what's happening right now, and that's the lowest bar that it could possibly go. And maybe you would disagree with that assessment, but I think that that's pretty like low of a range, and I don't think that it's going to be close to that bar as well, uh, either. Right. So the midpoint is maybe he just performs a little bit better than his first time around, and the reason why I put the midpoint there is it's like better than his performance the first term is because of the video game thing that I talked about earlier, the analogy, right? Where I said, if you play a video game, the second time you play it, you're going to be a little bit better, right? So if you paid attention and you actually try to play a video game the first time properly, the second time you play the same video game, you'll probably do at least slightly better. Right. And that's where I would put my midpoint as to what my expectations are. And then the high point would be like, I would put it really high where, you know, he works, he's able to listen to new ideas. He's able to implement new ideas now that he has control of the Senate and the House. And he's able to listen to, you know, smart people like Elon Musk and RFK Jr. to implement drastic changes that improves America's health, to, you know, secure the border, lower the crime rate, and, you know, he might do a better job at protecting democracy than the Democrats. And as I know, people are like, that's crazy talk. What are you talking about? He's the architect of Jan 6 or whatever. Like the voter in ID thing that I was talking about earlier, right? He's going to ensure that everybody who votes, you need to show your ID and get that information verified that you're eligible to vote before you can cast the ballot. So I think that's incredibly important for protecting democracy. And it's crazy that a lot of American states don't have voter ID requirements. And I know that's more of a state issue, but I'm not sure exactly what he can do to fix that. But I think he's going to definitely try and move towards that direction of fixing that problem, which, by the way, again, as I said earlier, it's like a issue that 85% of America is actually in agreement with, that you should be able to, you should have to show your ID before you vote. So a lot of these things, I think, like my high point is pretty high. I get it, right? But at least my midpoint, my base case is that he performs slightly better, at least compared to his first term performance. So and if you just look at, you know, the health of the economy and you interview people on the street in back in like 2018, 2019, before the pandemic, because the pandemic was a special case, I guess we can, you know, forgive me for giving him an exception for that. But just besides the pandemic, if you ask people before the pandemic happened what they thought about their lives, I think that a lot of Americans were saying it was on its way up.